I'd always wanted to spend a few days away from everything. No phones, no noise, just the sound of nature. So when a coworker mentioned his family's old cabin by a frozen lake up north, I didn't hesitate. He said it hadn't been used in years, but it was fully stocked, quiet, and surrounded by pine woods. I packed light, just some food, a flashlight, and my old camera. The plan was simple. Relax, read, maybe take some pictures of the winter scenery. The drive was long, winding through silent roads coated in snow. It was almost dark when I reached the cabin, a small weathered structure with a porch facing the lake. The air was freezing, my breath forming tiny clouds in front of me. The first thing I noticed was how still everything was. No wind, no birds, just the faint creak of the trees in the distance. It wasn't peaceful, it was unnaturally quiet. Inside, it smelled of old wood and dust. The fireplace still worked, so I got a fire going. Once it was warm, I walked out to the frozen lake. The moon was high, its reflection spread across the smooth ice. That's when I noticed something odd, a trail of footprints. They started a few feet from the porch and went straight toward the lake. The weird part? There were no return prints. Whoever walked out there hadn't come back. At first, I thought it might just be some trick of the light, maybe animal tracks distorted by melting ice. But when I looked closer, they were clearly human. Bare footprints, no shoes, no boots, just feet on ice. I followed them only halfway before I stopped. The surface creaked under me, and the thought of falling through wasn't worth it. I turned back, the wind finally picking up behind me, making the cabin door creak as if it was calling me back. That night, the sound of cracking ice kept me awake. Every few minutes I'd hear it, sharp, distant, echoing. I told myself it was just temperature changes, but around 3 a.m., I heard something different. Footsteps on the porch. Slow, heavy, deliberate. I froze. The cabin walls were thin. I could hear everything. Whoever was out there didn't knock. They just stood. The wooden boards groaned under their weight, and then there was silence. I reached for my flashlight and pointed it at the window, but all I could see was frost. My own reflection staring back. I waited, heart pounding, hand shaking. But eventually, the sound faded. I didn't sleep after that. When morning came, I went outside. The footprints were back, same size, same direction, leading from the porch to the lake. Again, no return. I checked the door. No marks, no signs of anyone forcing it. Just those prints, fresh in the snow. That day I tried to distract myself. I took photos of the woods, made some coffee, and read by the fire. But as evening came, I felt uneasy again. Around sunset, I went outside and saw something that made my stomach drop. Out on the frozen lake, near where the prints ended, was a figure just standing there. They were facing the cabin. Too far to make out details, but I could tell it wasn't wearing a coat. It looked pale, still. For a second, I thought it might just be a trick of the light again, but when I blinked, it was gone. I ran back inside and shut the door, locked it, pulled the curtains. Every creak and gust outside made me jump. I tried to tell myself I was imagining things, that maybe I'd seen my own reflection on the ice. But later that night, I heard it again, those same footsteps on the porch. This time, I didn't move. I just listened. They stopped right by the door. Then, a faint scratching sound started, like nails dragging across the wood, slow, back and forth. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might give out. It went on for what felt like forever, and then, silence. When the first light of dawn came, I opened the door carefully. Nothing. No one. But the prints were there again. The same path from the door to the lake. I followed them this time, slowly, step by step, until I reached the edge. That's when I noticed the ice, faintly cracked in a circular shape, like someone had fallen through long ago, and the hole had refrozen unevenly. I crouched down and touched the surface. It was solid now, but underneath it looked darker, deeper. As if something was there, just under the ice, watching. I stepped back and turned toward the cabin, and froze. There were new prints now, not leading away, but toward me, from the cabin door. They stopped just a few feet from where I stood, the space between us empty. I didn't see anyone, didn't hear a thing, but the air felt heavier, colder. I could swear I felt breath against the back of my neck. That was it for me. I grabbed my things and drove off that morning. The road back felt longer than before, like the woods didn't want to let me go. I didn't look in the rearview mirror once. When I returned the cabin keys to my coworker, I told him something was wrong with that place. He laughed it off, said I must have been spooked by the wind or the ice. But when I mentioned the footprints, his expression changed. He said quietly, "You saw them too?" Apparently, years ago, his uncle drowned in that lake. They found his body frozen just beneath the surface, barefoot, like he'd sleepwalked out in the cold. Since then, everyone who stayed there claims to hear footsteps or see prints leading to the lake. I didn't believe in ghosts before that weekend. I'm still not sure I do. But every now and then, when I close my eyes, I can still hear the faint crack of ice and those slow, heavy steps outside the door. And sometimes I still wonder what would have happened if I'd opened it. I took the forest trail alone. That was the mistake everyone pointed out later. But solitude was the whole point. I'd spent the last 2 years buried in city noise, constant messages, constant movement. My therapist called it sensory fatigue. I just called it exhaustion. So I rented a small hunting cabin deep in the northern woods. No neighbors for miles, no signal. Just me, the trees, and the sound of snow crunching under my boots. The cabin was basic. One room, a stove, a bed, and a single dusty window facing the endless line of trees. It looked ancient, almost forgotten. The previous owner had left a few notes in a weathered journal on the table. Don't wander too deep after dark. Keep the window shut. And if you hear knocking, don't answer. I thought it was just some local folklore nonsense. Hunters love leaving behind creepy warnings to spook newcomers. I laughed it off. The first night was calm. The fire crackled softly while the wind whispered through the pines. But around 2 a.m., I woke up suddenly, not from a sound, but from the silence. The kind of silence that makes your ears ring. I sat up and glanced at the window. The frost patterns on the glass looked strange, like handprints. When I got closer, they weren't from the inside. They were outside. 5 distinct impressions, small but human. I stood there for a long time, staring into the dark tree line. My flashlight beam didn't reach far, just the first few rows of trees. Beyond that was blackness, and maybe movement. Something about the forest felt wrong after that, like it was watching me back. The next morning I checked the area. No footprints, just snow, untouched, perfect. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling. Every time I stepped outside, the woods seemed attentive. I started hearing faint cracks in the distance, branches breaking. Not from wind, but something heavier. By the 3rd day, I noticed small things changing. The door latch I was sure I'd locked was open. My flashlight had moved a few inches on the table. The journal, the one left by the last occupant, had flipped to a new page, one I hadn't read yet. It comes closer when you stop looking. Don't leave the light off for long. That night, I tested it. Stupidly. I turned off the lantern and waited in bed. For a few minutes, nothing. Then, faintly, a sound. Something brushing against the cabin wall, like fingertips dragging along the wood. I held my breath. It circled slowly, moving from one side of the cabin to the next. Then, a knock. Just one. Right beneath the window. I didn't move. Didn't even blink. The knock didn't come again, but I heard breathing. Shallow, muffled, almost human. Just outside the wall. I forced myself to turn on the lantern. The sound stopped instantly. By morning, I packed to leave. But when I stepped outside, my tracks from the day before were gone, replaced by a single trail of small, barefoot prints circling the cabin, over and over. Like something had walked around it all night. The snow was too soft for them to be preserved that clearly. Whatever made them was light, or fast, or both. I decided to hike back early, but the path had vanished under new snow. I had my GPS, but it was dead, battery drained overnight. So I followed what I thought was the right direction. But after an hour, I realized I was going in circles. The same fallen tree, the same claw marks on the bark. That's when I heard it again. That same slow knocking sound, but this time from deeper in the woods. Knock, pause, knock. It wasn't echoing. It was responding to me. Every time I took a step, it answered. I turned toward the sound and saw movement. Not a person, but a shape. Thin, grayish, barely visible between the trees. It didn't walk like a man. It unfolded. I ran. Didn't look back until the cabin was in sight again. I slammed the door, locked it, and sat by the fire until dawn. When the sun came up, I found something waiting on the porch. A small object, my missing flashlight, covered in frost. It was placed neatly, right by the door. I left that morning without looking back. The forest seemed to breathe around me as I walked. I didn't see anyone, didn't hear anything except the crunch of my boots. A week later, I got a call from the ranger who maintained that area. He said they'd gone to check the cabin after I left and found it in good condition, except for one detail. The journal on the table had another entry written in handwriting that didn't match mine or the previous owners. It said, "You look too long." Before we move to the last story, make sure to like and subscribe, so you don't have to scroll next time to find more spine-chilling stories. All right, now let's move to the final one. I've spent most of my adult life working as a wildlife photographer, which means I've spent a lot of nights alone in the woods. But nothing ever made me question my sanity quite like that one trip last winter. I had rented a small cabin deep in the northern forests of Montana, right near a frozen lake that locals said was beautiful but cursed. I didn't care much for local legends. I was just there for the quiet, the scenery, and maybe a few good shots of elk crossing the ice. The cabin was small, one room, wood stove in the corner, and a single oil lamp that barely lit the place. The forest was thick, the kind where the trees block out most of the sky. At night, it was the kind of darkness that makes you aware of your own heartbeat. The first night passed quietly, just the creaking of the wood and the wind moaning outside. The second night, though, that's when things started to feel wrong. Around midnight, I woke up to what I thought was footsteps crunching in the snow outside. Slow, deliberate, heavy. I sat up, half awake, straining to listen. The sound stopped. Then a moment later, crunch. Crunch, crunch, closer this time. My first thought was that it could have been an animal, maybe a moose. But animals don't stop and start like that. Animals don't walk in rhythm. I grabbed my flashlight and looked out the frost-covered window, but there was nothing, just trees and the reflection of my own breath on the glass. I decided it was my imagination, the kind that plays tricks on you when you re-alone for too long. I went back to bed, forcing myself to ignore the pounding of my heart. The next morning, I stepped outside and checked the snow. There were tracks, human tracks, leading up to the cabin, circling it once, and then heading back into the woods. Whoever it was must have been standing right outside my window. My stomach twisted. I thought maybe a hiker had gotten lost, so I followed the tracks for a few hundred feet, but they just stopped. No direction change, no sign of struggle, nothing. It was like the person had simply vanished. I tried to shake it off, told myself the snow must have covered the rest of the trail. But by that evening, a storm rolled in. The wind howled, the trees groaned, and the whole forest seemed alive with sound. Around 11 p.m., I lit a lantern and sat by the window, editing photos on my laptop. Then I noticed something strange. One of the pictures I took that morning, near the lake, had a shape in the background, a pale, almost human figure standing between two trees. I hadn't seen anyone out there. I zoomed in, but the image distorted. The figure didn't look like a person exactly. Too tall, too thin. The posture unnatural. I stared at it for a while until I realized my lantern was flickering. The temperature inside the cabin dropped sharply. My breath turned white. The fire hadn't gone out, yet the room felt freezing. Then 3 slow knocks on the door. I froze. Not a frantic knock. Slow, measured, like whoever was out there wasn't asking to come in, just reminding me they were there. I didn't move, didn't speak. After what felt like minutes, I whispered, "Who's there?" Silence. The door creaked, just slightly, as if something had pressed on it. I grabbed my rifle from the corner and aimed, even though my hands were trembling. The sound of footsteps moved from the door, to the side of the cabin, then to the back, circling again. My pulse was hammering in my ears. I wanted to call someone, but I had no signal, not even a single bar. So I waited, staring at the door, finger on the trigger, every creak of the wood sounding like it was about to splinter open. And then, nothing. After maybe half an hour, the wind died down. I built the fire back up and forced myself to stay awake until morning. When I finally stepped outside, there were fresh tracks in the snow again. The same human-like footprints. But they weren't leading away this time. They ended just a few feet from my door. And then there were long drag marks, like something heavy had been pulled back into the trees. I packed up that morning. Didn't even bother to eat breakfast. I just threw everything in my truck and started driving. Half a mile down the road, I saw something that made my stomach turn. Another cabin, old and half collapsed, buried in snow. And in front of it, a wooden cross, freshly carved. As I passed, I swear I saw movement through the shattered window. Just a flicker, like someone standing inside, watching. That night, I stopped at a motel an hour away, just to calm down and check my photos again. I was scrolling through them when I saw something I'll never forget. The last picture ID taken of the cabin before I left, it had me in it, standing by the truck. But I hadn't taken any photos of myself. And behind me, in the cabin window, there was that same pale figure, staring out. Even now, months later, when I look at that photo, I still can't tell if it's just the light or something else entirely. But every once in a while, when I camp alone, I feel the same chill in the air, the same quiet pressure, like something's still out there, waiting in the trees. And I still wonder what the hell that was.